Ladies and gentlemen, welcome back to Collecting Issues, where this week we'll be taking a look at Mr. Miracle by Tom King and Mitch Gerads, the 2017-2018 series from DC Comics, collecting issues 1 to 12 of the Eisner Award-winning series. Yeah, so
very good.
We're back.
Ben, just a little throwback there. When you said Tom King, do you mean my friend Tom King?
Now, to be clear, Michael, for this and the rest of this particular episode of Collecting Issues, we are not referring to Tom King when you hear the words Tom King.
We're not referring to Tom King.
No, we're referring to the lauded DC writer,
yes,
Tom King.
Not my friend Tom King.
Not your friend Tom King.
Who has nothing to do with comic books.
Nothing to do with them. And I feel like maybe if we'd slowed down and taken a look at this, you'd probably have realised that without me telling you.
Right.
But
okay.
Still,
well, look, I think I've got it.
You're a logical man.
I think I've got it.
I bet you don't.
I think I've figured it out.
I bet you don't.
Probably smooth sailing from here on in.
I definitely won't be frustrated at the end of this.
Good.
Definitely not. So basically, we took a look at Mr. Miracle, Michael, this week.
We did, Ben. A much lauded comic book. The very comic book in front of us says, Ben, Eisner Award winning. No, where does it say? By far the best comic book on the stands, Entertainment Weekly.
I don't trust Entertainment Weekly. It's a bunch of American people that sell bylines for money. But I do trust Eisner Award winning comics for Best Writer and Best Artist.
Isn't that voted on by comic professionals, comic retailers and librarians?
Yeah, I kind of trust librarians. Librarians are good people. Kinky.
Not all of them. Apparently the sexy librarian trope has caused a lot of problems in the librarian industry.
Really?
Yeah. Totally off topic, Ben.
Anyway.
Tell us about Mr. Miracle.
So, I think one of the key things here is Jack Kirby is the man responsible for all the characters that we're going to meet throughout this 12-issue run.
Each and every last one of them?
Almost all of them.
Okay.
Almost all of them. He famously started up what's called the Fourth World at DC Comics, and the Fourth World was his kind of cosmic space odyssey involving the two worlds of New Genesis and Apocalypse. It's his retelling of the Bible in space.
Very heavily influenced by Marvel's Asgard comics,
which was also his in majority more than minority. We're going to see some interesting things in this one. I suppose to begin with, we should probably take a look at an overview of what happens in this. It follows around the aforementioned Mr. Miracle. Mr. Miracle is scot-free in the canon of the Fourth World.
What a pun.
What a pun, because he got away
scot-free. Yes, I get it now.
And basically his superpower, for lack of a better term for what it is, his talent, his gift, I don't think they call them superpowers. That's not what they call them in the comic.
His ability.
His ability is that he can escape any trap. I can always escape is the mantra that we see many times throughout this comic. And traditionally he's portrayed as very much what you would expect from someone who can always escape. He's very carefree and very easy in traditional representations of him in media and things like that. But throughout this, we actually get a much more personal look at Mr. Miracle and the man that he is.
And maybe some things that he can't escape, Ben.
And maybe some things that he can't escape, Michael.
Like responsibilities.
Like responsibilities and things he must do, also known as
responsibilities.
Yes. Yeah. But we get a much more human look at New Gods in this. And it's really interesting. We get to see him go up against many of the big villains that he would have had in his past. And there's a nuance kind of given to the New Gods world that was maybe lacking or maybe never explored prior to this. It's a very interesting comic, Michael. That's my opinion. It's a very interesting comic, and it's important really before we begin to look at why Jack Kirby wrote The New Gods.
Okay, go on.
Jack Kirby had a military career. Prior to his work in comic books, he was a field artist for the US military.
He was in the army.
Yeah, he was in the army. He was an army man. And he struggled quite a bit with the concept of that war and what it meant for people. Are people inherently good or inherently bad? Now, that's not my guessing of what he was doing. That's all written about in his autobiography.
Ben, speaking to your mic.
That's all written about in his autobiography. Sorry, I'm a little bit away from the mic. And he kind of said that the World War II was something that made him question the role of good and evil and whether or not you could look at things like that and the violence that men are capable of in times of war. He said it was a very interesting thing for him. And one of the key characters he used to explore that in the Fourth World was Orion. Orion is his god of war,
right?
His pantheon, his DC pantheon. And he really looked at that. And many people have said that Tom King's new version
My friend Tom King.
No, not your friend Tom King. Is very violent and a little bit away from what Jack Kirby would have wanted. But he argues, Tom King, not your friend Tom King,
right,
argues that it's actually a logical progression of that investigation of violence and war. because war in 2017, when this was published, was a very different creature to World War II.
There was very few men in trenches.
Very few men in trenches, and there was a lot more political power playing going on, according to Tom King. Now, bear in mind, one thing that will colour a lot of what we read in your Not Your Friend Tom King's
very good,
run is that he is an ex-CIA officer.
Allegedly.
I think it's very much been proven at this point. But
has it though?
Well, we don't know. I don't think the CIA go around going, yeah,
definitely one of ours. Yeah.
I don't think they do that, but he would have seen, one would guess, a lot more of the political side of conflict in that regard.
Mm-hmm.
And I think that really shines through in this particular comic. What did you think of it, Michael?
Ben, I think that every conflict is political, first of all.
Okay, cool. It's now the Michael and Benjamin's political era.
Yeah, but anyway, let's bloody get on with it. Ben, look, I don't follow a DC comic quite as much as you do.
I love them.
And I am obviously quite aware of the main players. There were very few characters in this comic that I'd never heard of before.
Yes.
But there were a few of them who I've never read in a comic.
They don't come up a lot.
Some of them, I imagine, are a little bit obscure. But Ben, this comic appears to be set in a slightly parallel universe or alternate reality to main DC comics.
Well, so this is the question. So
right.
we have a lot of things going on here. It certainly isn't the traditional fourth world run of things. We center around Mr. Miracle and Big Barda. Scott Free and Big Barda, his wife, his kind of Amazonian proportioned gladiator wife. They
suffer from tall woman's short husband syndrome.
Doesn't seem to bother them.
No,
in fact, they get up to some quite kinky antics based on that exact thing.
They don't mind.
Which you know, piqued my curiosity. Not gonna lie.
I bet you did.
Not gonna lie. Some questions came up. Is
there any taller women out there? Ben is 5'7", so
that's a lie.
If anyone
can
get
me shorter
in touch,
than I am. We're almost the same height.
No, we're not.
You have centimeters on me, if really.
That's because you wear lifts.
We've center on there. We center on their life and we take a look at what they're doing. They're interesting because they choose to live on Earth. That's where they live. They live away from Apocalypse and New Genesis and the conflict that comes between those two worlds. And then obviously something goes wrong. Darkseid makes a huge power play, and war is brought about on New Genesis and Apocalypse. And basically Scott Free and Big Barda have to navigate this war from home and from there. But the interesting thing is that this comic book series opens with a rather graphic image of Scott Free having slit his wrists in the bathroom.
So here's where we're going, Ben. This is what I need to know.
Go on.
To get any further in this. Is that something which happened only in this comic? Or did Scott Free slit his wrists in the mainstream DC comics and then this kind of spun off from that? Or
there is no answer for this. Tom King has decided to do this and has, not your friend Tom King, settled down. Every time I do that, Mick kind of pricks up like a dog whose owner has just come home from work and he's like, oh,
I can do a joke.
There have been no easy answers given. This very much plays with the concept of an unreliable narrator. It very much plays with the concept of
what is real.
Is this just real life? Is this just fantasy?
Yeah. Are we
caught in a landslide? Yeah. He has no escape from reality. Or
does he, Ben? He might do.
So, this is the whole crux of this story, is that we don't actually know if this is really happening, if he's in hell, if he's in heaven,
if he's in heck,
if he's in purgatory. It would seem to follow a rough approximation of a lot of Dante's work in the Inferno and purgatory and things like that. This concept of questioning where you are and what you're doing.
What is real life?
One of the things that makes it very much a Tom King book and marks it out as it, not your friend Tom King, settle down. One of the things that really marks it out as a Tom King book is the fact that he focuses minutely on the human aspect of these characters.
That's what he does, isn't it?
Yeah, that's kind of his whole shtick. One of the things...
It's his whole raison d'etre.
That gets him a little bit of criticism, or quite a lot of criticism, depending on who you are.
From you, mostly.
From me, mostly, but I've had to go back and reinvestigate in light of this series and a couple of interviews I read with Tom King. Probably what annoys me about Tom King is that he humanizes, not your friend Tom King, is he humanizes the characters that he deals with in a way that probably jars with how I have that character held up on a pedestal in my head. For example,
go on.
His major criticism from Batman fans is that Batman is too weak mentally in the comic books that he does.
He's a real wimp.
He's not necessarily, he's still a physically imposing man, but he breaks down a lot.
He's a bit of a whinge.
And that's Tom King's thing. He takes characters like that and he looks at the real world ramifications of what an event like that would do. Heroes in Crisis was very much the same thing for him. And probably I'm being a little bit unfair to Tom King when I kick off because I have an emotional link to those characters in my brain. And when he challenges my concept of that character, it annoys me.
Do you want to fight him?
I couldn't fight him.
He lives in Canada.
He's in Canada.
And you're 5'7".
And I'm 5'7" with lifts.
With lifts.
So he humanizes all these characters. And I think one of the things that distinguishes his fourth world from Jack Kirby's fourth world, and it's important to draw that distinction, is Jack Kirby always had a clear right and wrong in his fourth world comics. Genesis
here's the baddies, here's
were
the
a
goodies.
great bunch of guys. Apocalypse was a parable for hell.
Mm-hmm.
That's how it worked. You knew who was good, you knew who was bad. In fact, Jack Kirby played around with the concept of being born good and bad. That was the whole...
Ben, you could almost say there was a kind of a nature versus nurture.
Very much so, and we'll come to that a little bit later in this
will
one.
we? Okay.
But Tom King doesn't do that with his characters.
I'd like to place a bet now, Ben, that you will forget to come back to that later.
Well, we'll put a pin in it.
Put a pin. Look, we'll put a little note here.
That's what a pin sounds like in the tiny room.
Right, go on.
And I think Tom King is not content to play with that clear division of good and evil. For example, we meet characters that traditionally we have loathed, for example, Granny Goodness.
Granny Goodness, yeah.
And it leads us to question whether or not she's actually a terrible person.
She is, though.
She seems to have some kind of affection for Scott.
Yeah, she's still a terrible person, though.
Well, you see, this is the point. He plays with that subjective element of whether or not we can see a terrible person objectively for what they do, or whether our emotional history with that person can actually lead us to be confused about the world around.
And some of the traditional goodies are not as goody as they might have thought they might be goodies.
So Light Ray has traditionally been portrayed as kind of a mischievous, arrogant trickster. In this, he's a petty asshole.
Yeah, he's real.
Very vindictive, very snivelling.
He would be played by Rafe Spall if he was...
I don't know who that is.
He's an actor.
He'd be played by him then.
Look him up.
And then I think Orion is very much given a very unglamorous lighting situation where he's just a warmonger.
He's just Darkseid.
Yeah.
He's really Darkseid's son.
Yeah, he's just Darkseid's son throughout this. And we get to look at the actions of fathers. For example, the High Father's action in making that treaty is questioned massively throughout.
The High Father is a little bit more Odin in this than he is usually depicted.
A lot more Odin in this. And more importantly, Scott Free is not really a hero in this. It's one of the interesting things that we see. He never makes the big call. He never makes the right choice. He is very frequently seen to doubt based on what he wants, not on what other people's wants. I think for a lot of people that are probably listening to this or who have any kind of knowledge of the New Gods, you may have gotten that from Bruce Timm's time creating different New Gods for Justice League Unlimited.
Did he create new gods?
Sorry, not creating. His version, the Timverse version.
Interpreting.
Yeah, interpreting those characters. And he kept them light and breezy. He really kept that golden age vibe to them. Scott and
Watching
Barda
their costumes.
are eternally happy. They have very easy lives together.
Mm-hmm.
Light Ray is mischievous.
They have a kinky sex.
No, they don't in the Timverse, but they do in this. This, as I said, Tom King, not your friend Tom King.
No, the author Tom King.
The author Tom King zones in on the difficulties of maintaining a relationship in this kind of environment where you're going off to war and murdering people and you have this horrific background being raised in Apocalypse. And they have had a very difficult nature versus nurture upbringing. They're good people on paper because they're the heroes of New Genesis, but both have been raised in what can only be described as one of the most horrific possible ways ever.
But Big Barda is from Apocalyptica.
She's a Fury from Apocalypse.
Oh, yeah, but she has grown up good.
Yeah.
Because love saved the day.
But even then, that's slightly retcon in this, where the only thing she loves is Mr. Miracle. She doesn't love other people. She's not necessarily a kind person.
She's still friends with the bad Furies.
She's the Furies, the humorous elements that the author Tom King brings in here.
Very good.
It's very interesting to see these weird jarring moments. It was a bit like a Wes Anderson film at times.
There is a touch of Wes Anderson's about it.
There's an odd moment here and there where that will come in.
Where the baddies visit each other in their houses and stuff like that.
Yeah, because they've been bonded. And again, it brings us back to question this thing of, can we separate terrible people from our lives if we have some kind of affection towards them? It's a big question. And we don't necessarily get a good answer. But as we were saying, nature versus nurture plays a huge role here. one of the most harrowing scenes I think that I found was the Mirror of Goodness scene. So Granny Goodness had a tool that she used to kind of psychologically torture the people in her care. Granny Goodness is, I suppose, what you'd call the training specialist of Apocalypse, where she takes people in and turns them into monsters.
Yeah, she's a bad egg.
Yeah. And she always fixes her wards when they're damaged and ill. Obviously, technology in Apocalypse is
essentially magic.
And she can fix them. But this mirror reveals the compounded damage that they have taken. It's a little bit like a picture of Dorian Gray.
A little bit,
but in a mirror form.
Yeah.
And there's a terrible scene that was very uncomfortable for me and quite touching, where Scott and Barda are forced to look at themselves in the mirror.
They choose to look at themselves,
to look at themselves. But again, this brings us back to nature versus nurture. Are they psychologically damaging themselves because they've been brought up to do that?
Mm-hmm.
Can you break that cycle of an abusive parent? Can you kind of escape what you were or what you were made to be? And it doesn't seem like they can for a long part of this book.
Well, Barda is very quick to violence.
Barda is extremely quick to violence.
She'll smash someone's head in with a stick.
No problem to keep her husband. Objectively, who we would have looked at as the good guy in the past. And she goes against her husband's wishes to do that. He accepts his execution order, agrees to stay away, and she refuses to allow that. And unleashes some serious violence.
She does smash someone's head in with a stick.
Which brings us on to Mitch Gerads' art. I think Mitch Gerads might be my favourite comic book artist working currently.
Oh, that's very interesting. It's a classic 9-panel layout, Ben, with the occasional splash.
Well, it's a classic post-80s 9-panel layout. And the reason for that is they wanted to play with time very much in this, and the best way to play with time in a comic book in terms of sequential work is the 9-panel layout. You can slow it up or speed it up depending on what you want to do with it. And because Tom King and Mitch Gerads, not your friend Tom King, and Mitch Gerads are so focused on the human elements, the 9-panel layout lets Tom King, there's a lot of standing still in a moment. That panel there that you're taking a look at, where Barda and Scott have sex, we focus on one panel with slight movements, but it is a realistic representation, perhaps, of certain people's sex lives. I don't know.
I don't know. I wouldn't know. How would I know?
But there's a lot of pausing on one character's face for 9 panels, and that lets the reader slow down as they move through it. And then other times, like this fantastic sequence in the middle where they break into New Genesis, it moves beautifully because it's all linear and moves along the panels in a beautifully smooth way.
While they argue about how they're going to do the living room. And it's fascinating. It's a masterclass in different colours and settings and things like that. Mitch Gerads has done a wonderful job of taking all those garish colours that really define the Kirby area, and he balances them beautifully. Like, he keeps all those original costumes. They don't look silly on these characters. He plays a lot more with proportion and body type, and his rendition of Apocalypse is the most horrifying way I have ever seen it portrayed. It does seem like this bleak, empty world where you could never possibly find hope. It's a fascinating thing to see. In some conversations between himself and Tom King was reminded of Iraq when the oil wells would burn at different points. He said he found that imagery quite striking, and you can see it throughout this comic. It's a fascinating look at Jack Kirby's Fourth World, kind of updated into a modern era. I really enjoyed it. I don't know how you felt about it, Michael. I don't know how I felt about it, Ben. I don't know if it was my favourite comic ever.
It's not my favourite comic ever, but it is some of my favourite art ever.
Oh, yeah, the art was very good. The art was very good, actually, all joking aside. I felt that it was something I'm noticing about the author, Tom King, as opposed to my friend Tom King, who doesn't write comic books. He just does jiu-jitsu. Is that he, I think, struggles with the nature of comic books, the ongoing nature of comic books, the constraints that writing within a universe put on a writer. I don't think he handles them very well. He
doesn't, and he admits that. He's been questioned on that several times, and he's been asked, are you rallying against what comic books are? And he has said in no uncertain terms, yes, I'm uncomfortable with them, I don't know how to do them, and so I just fuck about.
Because, Ben, I was reading this, and as I said, I'm not a huge follower of the Fourth World characters or even the mainline DC comics, but then when Granny Goodness got clubbed in the head, I went, oh goodness, she's a character I've heard of.
She's a big character.
Been violently killed.
No questions asked.
Then, a bit later, we find that Orion has been killed. And I was thinking, well, hold on a moment. Has Orion been killed? Is Orion dead now?
Big one.
Because Orion is the kind of, he's the Thor of the fourth world.
Yeah,
he's
the Mac Daddy.
He's the main character.
Yeah.
The All-Father is killed. The High Father.
The High
Father is killed.
Full
Off
spoilers.
panel, I think. Yeah, full spoilers, obviously.
Darkseid is killed.
Darkseid is killed arguably too easily, but we'll get to that later. But all of these dramatic things that happen, it's very easy to write a dramatic comic by killing off popular, long-standing characters.
Well, I think... Go on, sorry.
With no consequence.
So that is Tom King's major criticism, and he got it exactly the same for Heroes in Crisis, where he murdered a bunch of characters and then brought them back at the end.
Oh, did he?
Yeah, so the way Heroes in Crisis works out is that many of the characters that were killed have somehow or another come back.
Okay.
Poison Ivy was dead, but she actually regrew from a plant that she gave to Harley.
Okay.
Because she can do that now.
Why wouldn't she be able to? It's a fictional universe.
But that's what I mean. He doesn't like consequence. He doesn't like writing himself into a corner, so he simply writes without corners.
Well, that's writing without corners is a good way to put it, I think.
Yeah.
Robert Kirkman, it reminds me a lot of Robert Kirkman in a lot of ways. Robert Kirkman likes a big monumental thing to happen. Sorry, I'm accidentally playing footsie with you there. Robert Kirkman likes a big monumental thing to happen, and then struggles in mainstream comics when he can't do that because he's not allowed to use... So what he usually does is has some apocalyptic villain come at the end and undo everything. Whereas this was like, that's it. I have a great story I want to do about the fourth world, the end of the fourth world. Essentially, it's
apocalypse for apocalypse.
It's the kingdom come of fourth world characters. This is the end of the fourth world story, and he's gone. I want to do the end of the fourth world story. I don't care if it's in continuity or not. Maybe he's mental. Maybe he's dead. Maybe none of this is really happening. It's grand. Don't worry about it. Listen, don't worry about it.
Yeah.
Don't worry about it.
It's hard to... Fans have loved it. Like, it has been massively popular. I'm not certain, and I did enjoy this comic immensely, but I'm not certain that it's all that well structured or constructed. It's messy. It's a messy comic.
Go on.
From start to finish. In that I'm not sure Tom King knows how to write an ending.
My friend Tom King?
No, not your friend Tom King. I'm not sure he knows how to write himself to a satisfying conclusion. I don't think he has that.
I thought this was quite a good ending.
Well, I'm not a fan of... I'm not a fan of build-up and no payoff. I think over time he repeats himself a lot through each issue. Sometimes that's intentional.
Yeah.
Other times it's not.
Where are you going? Give me an example.
Tracking a lot of ground. So there's two ways. Well, let's look at a positive way that he does it in the first place. Darkseid is used as a panel technique.
That's good.
They remove any imagery. They just use a simple type font on black versus thing, and it says Darkseid is. It functions pretty much
on black versus thing.
It's white font on black. Colouring on a black panel,
right.
And that's all it is. And it's used as a memento mori. Basically, anytime Scott becomes too hopeful, or anytime he is kind of reaching an upward point in his life, this will flash on the thing. And both Mitch this will flash in the 9-panel sequence as one of the panels in the 9-panel sequence.
All
Sorry,
right.
I forgot that I'm speaking, and I have to be very clear on how that works. It flashes up as one of the panels in a 9-panel sequence. And it functions, I think, as a memento mori, basically. It is a reminder that death is inevitable, and Darkseid in this universe embodies that concept of death.
It's one of the best efforts I've ever seen to instill a kind of dread about a coming villain.
He's almost featured not at all. And that was one of my favourite things. Of the many criticisms that could be levelled against Darkseid as a villain, big spooky grey man.
Big spooky grey man, yeah, bit of a chin.
Also talks far too much. He's well known for the long soliloquies about how, Kryptonian, you are so flawed. And he goes off on a rant.
Eye lasers!
He's basically the lad down the pub who had a tough day and won't shut the fuck up about it all of the time. And that's the thing that happens. Here, he becomes far more just an ominous force that seems to operate in the shadows. We don't see him until issue
I don't know.
10?
I didn't really keep track of the
Issue
issues.
10 of the 12, which is a lump of issues for a Fourth World comic not to feature
That's how you
Darkseid.
build a dread.
And it works really well. So it operates as a moment of pause. Mitch, Gerads, and Tom King, not your friend Tom King, both said that they wanted to take certain moments in the comic, especially after violence or in a moment of peace, where that snap in the 9-panel grid where you insert the Darkseid Is panel is actually a jarring moment where you have to pause and reflect on what you've just read. It causes a literal stop in your skimming when you read because it breaks up the visual narrative. And it was important for them when you stop and kind of really take stock of what that is. And it's a very mysterious phrase. It's very ambiguous. And that's the whole point. It makes you kind of go, oh, what is?
Darkseid is? Darkseid is coming?
I got the hardcover version of it, and the dust cover is excellent because it has that embossed inside the black on the cover. It's just Darkseid is, Darkseid is, Darkseid is, Darkseid is.
Mr. Moneybags over here with his hardcover.
Yeah. You get out of here. You sort yourself out. I
got the cheap one.
Of course you did. Look at you. No, you didn't like that, did you? That hurt, didn't it? Yeah, that wasn't fun at all. See what you made me do?
Bloody 5'7".
With lifts.
With lifts.
Ben,
go on.
Sorry, to give you an example of repetition that I didn't enjoy.
Yes, that's where we were going.
To give you an example of repetition I didn't enjoy. Funky Fleshman was repetition that I felt was too verbose and not very useful.
He was Stan Lee, wasn't he?
I don't know how he was treated. He's definitely Stan Lee. There's no doubt about it.
He's a criticism of Stan Lee.
He was always a criticism of Stan Lee. That's why he functioned, and that's the way he functioned when he was created. I didn't understand the level of venom leveled at him through this character, and he seemed to have a redemption arc running to some point through. So again, I think this is Tom King wrestling with the concept of, can we like somebody even though they've been objectively a terrible person at certain points?
And he died while this was being made.
Yeah, and I don't know, it was a weird thing. I didn't understand that character, and I felt he was shoved in at times when it just wasn't necessary.
I
felt like he was a real filler noise. I understood when Oberon, Scott's former mentor, kind of manifested as a symptom of his depression or madness or whatever.
Or did he?
Or did he? I mean, these are the questions that we're going to have throughout. And I got that. Flashman was bludgeoned by Barda.
But then he came back.
No problem.
He was fine.
And
maybe he wasn't real.
Maybe he wasn't. Like, it's hard to tell. It's that's what I mean. There's a lot of questions there. That was repetition I felt didn't suit. Anyway, Michael, sorry, you go on and tell me a bit about what you thought.
What did I think? I don't even remember what I thought, to be honest with you.
Cool. Right, but then I'll move back and forward to the next things. Some of the interesting themes that we deal with here, and I think probably the one that a lot of people would have connected with, much to the joy of King and Gerads, is the depression arc that runs strongly throughout this.
He's depressed.
Not only depressed, but suffering from a large amount of PTSD.
Yeah. Suicidal tendencies. And I suppose when you logically look at a character who consistently put themselves in death traps for people's entertainment, yeah, that seed was sown a while back. It looks at, first of all, Scott Free's depression in a very grim way. He grows that beard out of depression, I think, more than anything else. Do you want to tell me something, Ben?
Yeah, I'm trying to tell you that, basically, yeah. But he grows that beard, and it kind of shows you, I've never seen Scott Free looking this schlubby. He doesn't normally have a beard. He doesn't normally go around in T-shirts.
He sorts himself out at the end, though.
And it's interesting. There's a big conversation about showers throughout the Mr. Miracle miniseries, where he's constantly going into a shower, trying to figure out how to turn them on. If he's on New Genesis, for example, because they have magic showers.
Yeah, am I clean?
There's a lot of this concept of cleaning yourself off. And there's a lot of criticism, I think, of I suppose what's a very popular way of dealing with depression in the modern era is like, you'll be fine. Go a walk.
Go sort it out.
Go step outside, just get up.
Get into nature.
Put on your clothes, you just go about your regular day. And that's
have a child.
That's parodied. Yeah, well, that's a whole different issue. That's parodied quite heavily by the standing mantra that is done by various new gods who were born on Apocalypse.
Yeah.
So whenever Scott is feeling particularly depressed, Barda will challenge him with the phrase "stand."
Yeah, and then he has to stand.
And he has to get up and stand straight, and then he responds standing. And it's the same with Orion. Orion has the same concept. You know what you must do. Standing.
Orion punches him in the head.
And then he smacks him about every time, and he has to keep getting up, and he has to keep doing. It is, I think, to me, a critique of that not very helpful advice of, look, It's just a phase.
Stand up and brush yourself off.
Take a quick shower. It feels better to be in the shower. And I do think it's a big criticism of that. There are the sins of the past that Scott and Barda away with. There's a lot of murder in this comic. A lot of killing.
They kill a lot of people. They kill a lot of people, fairly innocent people.
Yeah, and then they kill a lot of new gods that they know. It's no problem.
Yeah.
A lot of guards die.
A lot of guards do die. And a lot of kind of minor named new gods die. And no one seems too upset.
There's a head on a spike.
Yeah, of someone you know.
And again, this is bringing us back to the question, is Scott a good person, or is he just a product of apocalypse? Is he desensitized to violence because of his upbringing, or is he desensitized to his violence because he never really cared? It's hard for us to tell. As I was saying earlier, that showering concept is there to kind of say he can't shake this off. This is something that Scott's been dealing with. Barda doesn't seem to feel it at all in the same way that he does. And King and Gerads really emphasize that on the scenes where he's curled up in a ball next to Barda because he's trying to just cope with everything. And she's on her phone.
And he's teeny tiny.
Yeah, and she's on her phone a lot of the time. Or talking about remodeling the house. Yeah. And they do deal with this level of desensitization and how they deal with this kind of thing. And then really what it is it's looking at repression and how depression is often ignored in favour of just push through it.
Push through it, Scotty.
And it's not working for Scott at all.
Or is it, though?
Well, you see, that's the thing you couldn't tell from the outside.
Because is it real?
Because he always masters, he's still a master of what he does. So you don't actually see him physically failing. He's still a great fighter and a wonderful general, and he kind of gets war and understands how to do all these things.
Beats Darkseid a bit too easily.
Yeah, well, I mean, that's the whole thing. And then it turns out that Metron, it's Metron in the New Gods world. Metron reveals himself to be the orchestrator of some kind of thing. And at the end of issue 11, he's given the option to return to the DC continuity.
Universe, yeah.
And he chooses not to.
Yeah.
And this, I think, was the thing that made many people laud the series more than anything else. Again, Scott Free makes the choice that will make him happiest. And then his own guilt, if it is his guilt or madness or whatever, tries to goad him into going back, where they're like, this is hell, you're in hell, like you keep suffering these things, can you do that? And he's like, I don't know, we'll see, I don't want to go back. And he chooses not to go back. So and it causes a further breakdown. And there's not necessarily anything wrong with that as a mini standalone series. He chooses the happy ending as opposed to fights for one.
The real ending.
The real ending is he possibly died on his bathroom floor when he committed suicide.
Possibly.
I mean, that's what we're looking at. That's the concept that we have to deal with. That last panel there at the end of the series says Mr. Miracle will not return.
Yeah. Will not be continued.
Will not be continued, And that's interesting. That's a fascinating element to look at. So I think existentially speaking, probably one of the strongest comics I've read in a while. In terms of representation of mental health and personality deficiencies and the question of whether you can be a good person objectively, fascinating comic. I really, really, really enjoyed it. Is it a bit long?
Arguably.
For me, yes. But I think the relationship between Barda and Scott is probably one of the more realistic comic book relationships I've ever seen.
Who would play him in a mini-series serialization of this?
Matt Bomer.
Matt Bomer is a good shout. I would have gone with Jake Johnson.
Yeah, could take both of those. Who'd play Barda?
A tall woman.
No.
Probably CG. You'd have to CG her tall.
Yeah, she'd have to be very big.
Use the bloody perspective trickery of The Hobbit.
Gal Gadot would have been a great call if she
hadn't
already been Gal Gadot. Sorry, Gal Gadot would have been a great call.
Well, Barda is Wonder Woman-esque, so anyone who was never cast as Wonder Woman but nearly was would be fine.
I'm trying to think who would be a good Barda. We'll get back to it. If you have any suggestions, let us know down below. Terms of
Jamie Alexander,
I don't know who that is.
Sif.
Oh, she'd be solid call. Great call.
Thanks.
In terms of throwaway symbolism and themes that we saw throughout, I think there's a really nice homage played to Silver Age heroes throughout. He wears different superhero t-shirts while he's on Earth.
Batman,
and
Superman.
It's all their classic symbols from the Silver
Flash,
Age. Nightwing makes an appearance. Adam Strange makes an appearance on his
Aquaman.
Aquaman makes an appearance. And there are posters referencing his career as a stuntman and an escape artist, and he does that quite a bit, and they often reference what's happening in the scene, I don't know if you noticed that about those pictures. For example, if I can just show you one there. There's a great scene right at the end of the comic where Darkseid is sitting on the couch.
Having some dip,
because he likes a dip, apparently. Never underestimate a good veggie dip.
Yeah, a hummus.
And it's a classic Mr. Miracle cover, and it says, "Oh no, it's him, not him."
Oh, there's
and he's sitting right there, and they're looking at him. So it's a really interesting thing. There is clearly a lot of love put into the Golden Age way of thinking that went into this comic, and it's referenced quite a bit. Also, rather interestingly, Jacob, their son, is obviously a parallel for Jack Kirby in some form, because they have that weird scene between Funky Flashman and him, where Funky Flashman draws them all, and Funky Flashman says, "I just do words. That's what I do." Because that's Stan Lee's famous role. Yeah. But at the end of that, Jacob sees Darkseid on the couch. He can see him. So again, it leads us back to that wonderful question of what is going on?
What's going on
in this world? Why can Jacob see a big, glitchy, holographic Darkseid?
My ultimate problem, Ben, with it, I think, was at no point was I strongly engaged enough where what is going on mattered to me.
Yeah, you're not invested much.
You know what I mean? Because it's the alternate universe reality wrap up in one. All right. Is he alive? Is he there? To be honest, I don't really.
Cities in a bottle don't work.
I'm not too bothered.
Stories in a bottle, self-contained.
But I love a bloody self-contained miniseries, Ben. A self-contained
miniseries is not the same as an alternate universe based on established characters.
That's what I'm saying. A self-contained miniseries, a Watchmen, great. But this, because of its semi-tangential relationship with mainstream comics, it left me a bit dry, a bit wanting.
Yeah.
It didn't really... But it was classic Tom King.
Tom King.
Look, Ben, if we like this, what else would we like? Good question, Mick. Thanks for asking. Vision by Tom King.
Yeah. Who could forget Vision by Tom King?
Vision by Tom King, which is about a red, green and gold caped character settling down in the suburbs.
Oh, God. Tom King can only write one story.
But, I mean, that has some similar aspects of someone involved in heroics setting up a family away from it and the problems that brings. But that is set in the mainstream Marvel universe, but also kind of isn't.
Yeah, because Tom King apparently can do what he likes.
Yeah, it is, obviously. And some of the characters from that entered mainstream Marvel continuity.
Oh, that's good.
His daughter, Viv.
Oh, is she in mainstream now?
She is, yeah. But the similar problem of what are the stakes here if this isn't real?
Yeah.
And in a little winky face when I say real. But, you know, it's not the first comic series to kind of deal with the character dealing with massive cosmic problems at the same time as worrying about remodeling their bathroom.
Yeah, I mean,
that's a classic Spider-Man.
It's a bit of a joke,
trope.
Isn't it? Yeah, classic joke. I think other comics that people could probably look at are God Country by Donny Cates for Image Comics.
Go on.
He kind of created his own fourth world parody, I guess, if you want.
That's interesting. You're taking a different tack to me.
Like an Asgard parody.
I'm looking more at if you enjoyed what this stands out in my mind.
Can you smell toast? Are you okay?
Yeah, I'm fine. Can sharks smell toast? Is that what it is? This stands out in my mind is a story about domestic life and depression and 9 to 5 normalcy.
In that case, I think that God Country under that criteria still matches, because it's about a dysfunctional relationship between a father and a son and how that's affecting his family in everyday life.
Yeah, no, I'm not necessarily arguing with you, but I'm saying that it's interesting that you've gone more for, if you like this, you will like other things which are kind of fourth worldy.
Yeah.
Whereas I was thinking more about, if you like this, you'll like other things about superheroes in normal domestic settings.
Fair enough.
So that's where I was thinking of Vision. That's where I was thinking of Invincible.
Invincible would be good for that. It does a great job of that.
Because that's what Invincible is. It's about a guy trying to have a normal family life.
Yeah, absolutely.
At the same time as dealing with intergalactic crises.
Yeah.
Spider-Man, again, if you want a superhero who's worried about how's he going to pay his bills. Or why does he have lady problems? Or, I mean, they don't handle depression as realistically or as scarily. But they are there as undercurrents.
I think there are very few comics out at the moment that would handle depression and mental health and things like that quite as in-depth as this one does. It is very realistic, occasionally bordering on the too realistic. But overall, I enjoyed it. I think you should pick it up. You should read through it. If you get bored halfway, give up.
Bloody, don't give up. Just give it a little break. Take a little break. Go read something light.
Yeah, because it's a slog. It's not light reading. This is probably the heaviest one we've covered so far.
It's literally the heaviest.
Both literally and metaphorically speaking in terms of theme.
Buy it from a local comic book shop so you don't have to pay for shipping.
Yes, which I eventually did. Anyway, ladies and gentlemen, what did you think of this one? There's definitely a lot to it. You can get in touch with us as usual at Michael and Benjamin's podcast on Instagram.
Yeah.
There's seanrebug.com.
Yeah.
You can get in touch with us there.
Facebook page.
We're on the Facebook page where you can give us all your thoughts and opinions, collecting issues.
Reddit, Ben.
We'd love to hear from you in general. Just let us know what you thought of it all round. We'd be fascinated on your opinions on Tom King in general.
My friend Tom King.
Not your friend Tom King. Although, if you want to give us opinions of Mike's friend Tom King, go ahead.
Be aware, though, he's very good at jiu-jitsu.
He's very good at jiu-jitsu. Make it a nice opinion. More importantly, guys, we will be back here in 2 weeks. We'll be taking a look at Bloodshot Reborn, the Valiant Comics.
Yes.
Valiant Comics. The Valiant Comics collection, collecting issues 1 to 6, Volume 1. Colorado. I think it's 1 to 6. It might not be.
Might be 1 to 5.
Also, on a personal level, I have a question to ask.
Oh.
If you know any good ways of making show notes for a podcast, could you please let me know? I am really stuck.
Hello, welcome to Amateur Podcasting Hour.
Yeah, well, screw it. I trust the listeners. The listeners might help us out. That's all from us for this week. We hope you enjoyed our discussion of Mr. Miracle 1 to 12 by Tom King, not your friend Tom King, and Mitch Gerads.
Bye. I can't escape from the tiny room. seanrebug.com